Hello, Joan. Thank you very much for accepting this interview. And I was just using the information from your book, which in Spanish has a very, very long title, which is How to Reach Physical and Emotional Stability or something like that through the power of the mind. I don't know what the translation for that one is in English, but it's one of the, it's a very, very, the first book I got from you many years, like 20 years ago, maybe it's already. And I've used it a couple of times in the radio with great results and reaction from the audience. So now I want to welcome you here to Radio Serenidad and the Ecuadorian and international audience that is connected right now. And first of all, I want to ask you about the importance of in the kind of life most people lead right now. Why is it so important to learn tools like meditation or relaxation, and what are the effects on health of learning how to relax?
Well, these are great questions, and I'm going to answer them in three parts. To look at the effects on your body, the effects on your creativity, your ability to be resilient and to do well in this world, and then look at the effects on your emotional life. So those three parts, Gloria.
Okay.
What we know, first of all, about our world is this. We're suffering from a tremendous amount of information overload. People can't catch up. We're all stressed with the global economic situation, the fact that we're in a place right now between no longer and not yet. It's the old way that we knew of doing business and being in the world is breaking down, and we don't know what the future will bring yet. And so the capacity to be in that place between no longer and not yet, to dwell in uncertainty, has everything to do with something called stress hardiness. And that's what I want to speak to first. When we are stressed, then what goes on in our body, in our mind, and our emotions, and our creativity is that those things contract to survival mode. And when your body contracts into survival mode, what happens, first of all, is that it affects a part of your brain called the hippocampus, which has to do with memory. And it, your short-term memory is not very good. You don't consolidate things well. To long-term memory, you lose your clarity, and you begin to become confused. Your body also puts out a hormone called cortisol. That, by the way, is the hormone that affects the hippocampus so badly. But it also affects the immune system. It affects the cardiovascular system. And we know now that there are a whole range of hormones, so many of them, that as soon as the mind perceives stress and thinks, my gosh, can I cope with this? All these short-term chemicals that are meant to keep you functioning while you're running from the equivalent of a saber-toothed tiger, all those come into play. But when they're chronic, it just wears the body out. So your memory, your immune system, all of that goes downhill. So essentially you become stupid and vulnerable to disease, is what happens. So we need to know how to counteract the stress response. And I want to first say I worked for a number of years with an American physician, a cardiologist, whose name is Herbert Benson. And he was the co-discoverer of what he calls the body's relaxation response. And that's the physiological opposite or antagonist to the body's stress response. And the way that you elicit this, in other words, to get out of the stress loop and allow your body to come back into balance, to come back where all of its systems are interacting harmoniously and well, is to get your mind to quit thinking about all your fantasies of fear and difficulty. And one way to do that is through meditation. Benson originally studied the transcendental meditation technique and then found any form of meditation where your mind is distracted from thinking, worrying, planning, and is just allowed to come into the moment. Any activity that you do that brings you into the moment is meditative, and it elicits the relaxation response and counteracts stress. So, for example, people think, of course, meditation, there are many different kinds, transcendental meditation. Doing the rosary is a form of meditation. You're moving the beads and you have something to say, a prayer to say with each bead. Almost every religious tradition has prayer beads of some sort or another. And that's what these do. They're actually bringing you into a relaxed mode of being that counteracts stress. And they also bring you to that place where instead of searching your mind for information, when you're in that relaxed state of mind, you're much more open to intuition, to a state of wisdom and creativity that gets blocked by thinking. Mm-hmm. So whether you do the rosary or you meditate or you do Tai Chi or you do yoga or you do a walking meditation where you're just counting your steps and the breath, or whether you practice mindfulness, which is just focusing in on the flow of your breath and just being aware in the moment of what comes, what goes, whether it's the temperature in the room, the view outside, what's going through your mind, but without focusing on it, just being present and watching. All those things elicit the relaxation response. Mm-hmm. And I think in this day and age, everybody needs to know how to elicit that response. And so you just got to choose a way that works well for you.
Exactly.
And do it a couple of times a day so that your body gets used to,
Now, you mentioned something that seems to be interesting and important to touch upon, and it's intuition. Why would we want to connect with our intuition? What's intuition, and why would we want to connect to it?
Well, intuition is all the ways that you know something without thinking about it. So, for example, even you have a sense of smell. You smell something, it reminds you of something else. It brings in a wave of information that you didn't have to think about. That's intuition. There are all kinds of subtle sensibilities that people have that are intuitive, that we don't even notice that we're having them. And it's also, things are going on in our mind all the time that our conscious mind is not aware of, but things are reorganizing there to give us wisdom. So I'll give you an example. The history of creativity is filled with examples of intuitive insight, leaps. And they all happen, by the way, in relaxed moments, Gloria. Mm-hmm. So, for example, the mathematician Poincaré, French mathematician, was trying really to do everything he could to solve an equation, and it was eluding him. So he went on a vacation, and he was just stepping off of a bus in the French countryside where he hadn't been thinking of the equation at all. He'd been enjoying the scenery, and suddenly, bam, in came the information. Well, it was there somehow, but it needed to recombine in a way that his mind was blocking. So intuition is a kind of openness to information. And in tuning in to the sources of it, I think that there's a larger source of divine information, or, consciousness, whatever you wish to call it, a holographic universe. And suddenly we can tap into that and know things that our own conscious mind doesn't know. And in order to do that, we have to, give the busy brain a little bit of rest and move into this other intuitive part of our being. Sometimes people call that the heart. It's not that it's emotional, it's that it's a deeper type of wisdom, intuition, and knowing.
Would this be a way like to connect to our soul or to our essential self?
Yes, I mean this is how you connect to the soul. You know, when we're busy, thinking, doing all the time, and not paying attention to what our own soul needs, we begin oftentimes to emotionally go downhill and sicken physically. We need the soul needs time in order for the soul to understand its own purpose. We need to go into stillness from time to time. That's why, again, most religious traditions have had a Sabbath. And that's because that kind of stillness and letting go of daily concerns is what feeds the soul. It feeds creativity. It feeds emotional balance. And we all need that so much.
Mm-hmm. And nowadays, like, we're going through so many changes. You mentioned the economic, but I'm sure the religious and the political situation is also changing in the world. And we might be on this, so much going on around the 2012 and so much simply just happening on the planet that we can see that something's happening that is completely different from the history that we've known. And there's a shift in consciousness, or at least there's a preparation for a shift in consciousness that's happening, and it's making people maybe feel more anxious or out of control or things like that. Would this be the perfect moment to be able to cultivate the inner silence and stillness and peace and meditation so we can actually know what to do?
Absolutely, because otherwise we're driven by fear. What happens neurologically, Gloria, is as soon as you start to think worried, anxious, fearful thoughts, a part of your brain called the amygdala really lights up and it takes over. And that's the most primitive part of the nervous system, that its job is to defend us from whatever is going on. And in that defensive, fearful mode, it's not possible to be creative. It's not possible to be resilient. What we all need to learn in this time is how to cultivate resilience. And one of the things that we need most in order to be resilient, creative, and create a future that's different from our past is that capacity to center ourselves, to turn off the amygdala, and to turn on the creative part of our brains. And that's really what all these relaxation techniques are doing. It's not just like taking a bubble bath. Mm-hmm. It's preparing yourself for the upcoming shift and changes in a very important way. And it also prepares your mind to be stress-hardy and to think in a different way. And that's a very important thing to do.
And how can we... what can we do to learn to relax? What would be the major tools that we can use to relax?
Well, I think everybody has got a tool that works best for them. I said all these things elicit the relaxation response, whether it's meditation, yoga, qigong, prayer, mindful walking, something like that. Any of those techniques will really work very well. People who are very anxious, for example, frequently have trouble sitting and meditating, because what happens, of course, is the minute that you get still, it's not that you get peaceful. It's that suddenly you're not distracted from all of the things that are worrying you. They all come up. And it takes a little time to develop the capacity to, here comes that fear of the economy. Here comes that fear of terrorism. Here comes that prejudice. Here comes whatever it is, to just develop the capacity to say, oh, it's just a thought. It's not who I am. It's just a thought. And I can let it go. And if you're meditating, you just label those thoughts thinking. Say that to yourself, and you go back to focus on your breath, a repetition of a word or a phrase or a prayer. But some people really need a group to learn to do that if you're highly anxious to start with. And I would tell people who find it's difficult to sit with their eyes closed and not be consumed by their fears or worries, that they would be better off doing an active form of meditation, something like yoga, because there you've got a very strong focus. You're focusing on your breathing. You're focusing on mindfulness of the feelings in your body, like, what does it feel like to stretch in a particular dimension? What does it feel like as the body lets go a little bit further into that stretch? And that's why people often would need a book or a program that shows them different ways to relax. That's why I wrote the book, Minding the Body, Mending the Mind, when I was running a stress reduction program at one of the Harvard Medical School teaching hospitals. I wanted people to be able to sample and understand the different relaxation techniques so that they could find the one that felt best to them. And that's really important. So I should say to your listeners, if meditation works for you, that's wonderful. If it doesn't, that's also wonderful. Try something else. There was a priest at one time who was working with Dr. Benson, and he was a runner, and he said he did his relaxation while he was running. And what it was he actually said a short prayer. He split it up on the in-breath and the out-breath. Lord Jesus Christ, in the in-breath, have mercy on me, in the out-breath. And he thought, well, that was great. I got my running, my prayer, and my relaxation in all at the same time. And he did. So we just have to learn how you keep your mind focused. And all of these things to train you, how you keep the mind focused and you don't become distracted by your own stressful thoughts and lost in the stressful stories that we tell ourselves about why things are happening.
Mm-hmm. Now, what relationship can you sort of find between learning to relax and open up to the spiritual self?
Well, once again, the whole sense of what your spiritual self is comes down to really being your authentic self. And frequently we're not. We've learned since early childhood that, to be accepted, we should behave a certain way. We should look a certain way. We should be a certain way. And so we learn to put a mask on that's much smaller than who we really are. And that's called the ego, or the conditioned self. And our own full self, our full potential, our spiritual self is much larger than that. And in order to get in touch with that larger self, we need to step out of the roles that we play. We need to step out of needing to be a certain way, to please somebody, to do something. And what spiritual practice really does is it takes us into that place of stillness, of silence, where once again we may not be feeling peace. we may be seeing our old patterns, but we begin to see more clearly what are the things in us that block our way. What are the things that require healing? What are like the old patterns that come up that we start to dwell upon while we're meditating. And sometimes that surprises people, that the spiritual practice is not the peace itself. The spiritual practice is becoming aware of those things that come up habitually that block your peace. Mm-hmm.
And would you say, I saw a video about the difference between religion and spirituality. Would you like to comment on that? Is there a difference between spirituality and religion?
Well, there's a huge difference, because religions, all religions, are based on the experience of their founder, whether it's Jesus or Moses or Buddha, or Mohammed, or whatever it may be. And this is passed down to other people as a series of teachings, as a series of doctrines, and frequently as a series of dogmas. And while religion certainly can bring us to spiritual awareness, sometimes it blocks spiritual awareness because we get stuck in the rules and the regulations and don't actually reach a point of divine union ourselves. And sometimes religion is very helpful to people. But spirituality is this. Although religion, as I said, can be a path to it, spirituality itself is not based on a belief system, it is not based on a doctrine, and it is not based on a dogma at all. Spirituality, I think, is best defined. There's actually a wonderful psychiatrist, Dr. George Valent, at Harvard Medical School. He's written a wonderful monograph on this topic that I found very helpful. And he said, really, spirituality is the capacity to experience 8 positive emotions. And those emotions are things like wonder, awe, sense of spacious connection with something larger than yourself, peace, joy, gratefulness, forgiveness. These are what spirituality really is. So, you know what I say to people who think they're spiritual because they have a belief? You know, it's like, oh, I believe in reincarnation, so I'm spiritual. But if you're sitting around being angry, anxious, upset, feeling fearful, not feeling any joy, you're not in a state of spirituality. You simply have a belief system. And so what we're really working to when we talk about awakening, spiritual awakening, is doing the necessary work to connect with our own authentic self. And that then brings about all of these other positive emotions, and we find ourselves in the present. We find the joy and the peace and the love and the compassion. Those are the 2 I left out, love and compassion. And spiritual practice is truly whatever we need, Gloria, to bring us to that place.
Mm-hmm. Now,
doing childhood stuff.
Now, most of us don't even know who we are because we've been conditioned since we were born, and we are completely identified with the conditioning. We are identified with the ego, and we are lost, probably, most of us, from who we are. So how can we unlearn what we have learned? How can we discover who we truly are amidst all this conditioning?
Well, you know, there are two ways that happens. One of them, I think the most common way, is that our life falls apart. You know, we lose our job, we lose our marriage, we lose our health. God forbid there's an illness or death of someone close to us. And suddenly, all the belief systems that everything has rested on gets called into question. And you wonder, what am I really doing here? What is this really all about? Was like doing this particular work that I created and found an identity in, and here I am, you know, fired or sick or, you know, whatever it may be. Suddenly, we're brought into a place of such discomfort and of such emptiness that the conditioning falls away. That's the blessing of change. And then you have to go through a period where you don't try to force yourself to put yourself back together too quickly. And it may be very uncomfortable, and you may need the help of course, friends, family, therapists, whatever it may take. But there you have a chance to find out who you are because the conditioning has crashed. That's one way.
Mm-hmm.
Another way I think that people find out who they are is kind of a gradual awakening over time. That they have some sort of a practice of awareness, beginning to notice the kinds of patterns that trip them up. Noticing, okay, why is it that in certain situations I get anxious all the time? Or why is it that I tend to think pessimistically, that when something bad happens, I always blame myself instead of looking at the situation? And as you begin to identify little by little, as you mature, those kinds of thinking and those situations that come up time and time again, then you can say, you know what, those are just patterns, it's just conditioning. I'm free to think another way. And then little by little by little, because you're noticing when those things happen, you drop your story time and time again until finally you start to feel free. And I would say that spiritual awakening has a great deal to do with what the mystics used to call interior freedom. Christian mystics called it interior freedom. And that is, you're free at any moment to respond with what the moment calls for. You're not reacting out of past conditioning, but you're conscious, you're present, and you're free to do whatever the most skillful thing is at that moment in time.
You think that would be a way to regain trust? Because it seems, of what I've noticed all over around, that there's mistrust, like people don't trust their own intuition or don't trust their own inner knowing. So that's why they're always depending on what other people have to say, what other sages might say about something, instead of connecting to the inner voice and giving it a voice. So,
well, that's a great question, Gloria. You know, my husband, Gordon DeVeron, and I wrote an entire book about that. Mm-hmm. And the title of that book is called Your Soul's Compass. And the subtitle is, What is Spiritual Guidance? And the main question is, how do you recognize your own intuition, that guidance that comes both from within you, through synchronicities, through every type of dream? Mm-hmm. How do you know the difference between it's your intuition that is trustworthy or it's actually your ego that just desires something or wants something? And that's a big question. And what we did was to interview 27 sages from different lineages. So Sufis, Buddhists, Catholics, Episcopals, Jews, so rabbis and priests and Zen sansais. And the interesting thing is, no matter what tradition people were grounded in, their answers were pretty much the same. And the main thing that we learned is it's so important to be able to discern where your inner voice is coming from. Is it the voice of ego or fear, or is it the voice of wisdom? And you have to learn some practices of discernment, because otherwise the ego will guide you astray every time. It hooks you. You know, it tells you you deserve this, you should have this, and you may not be clear on it at all. And so the most important thing to be prepared for guidance is you have to cultivate your awareness. And your one form of awareness is simply what your body is telling you, because that's the clearest source of wisdom. And so if you're thinking about something, let's say you say to yourself, well, you know, I think the job market is such that I better retrain to be a radiology technician. There are jobs in that field. And you say that to yourself, and you think, well, you know, that's a pretty good thing. My intuition is guiding me, telling me, you know, where there are going to be jobs. But you check in with your body, and suddenly you realize, oh, I don't know. When I think of that, there's butterflies in my stomach, or there's a constriction in my throat. then, the body is giving you information. Hey, maybe that's not going to make you happy. Maybe it's not the kind of career that's best for you. On the other hand, when you feel a great sense of ease and aliveness in your body, that's frequently when you can trust, yes, I've gotten information that's reliable. But in order to trust, here's what you need to do. You need to actually get yourself a journal and keep track of your intuitive hits. We all have many of them, but they're like a flash in the pan. They go away right away. Mm-hmm. And so if every time you have an intuition about something, you write it down, then a week later, 6 months later, a year later, whatever it is, you can check those intuitions and you can begin to see, there's a pattern to them, and here are the kinds of things that happen to me that are trustworthy, and here are the kinds of things that I've noticed are not trustworthy. So, in other words, you've got to be able to discern what's true in your own intuitive guidance.
Mm-hmm. How about have you done work with dreams, and how much the dreams can actually give you that intuitive information about whatever past, future, the present?
Oh, absolutely. And dreams, of course, there was a study done at Duke University, now maybe 20, 25 years ago. But through this large study, they recognized that 10% of dreams are actually precognitive. And that, of course, is very interesting because it tells us our intuition can tell us what's going to happen in the future, even though the future has not happened yet. It tells us the universe is more complex than our linear left brain would imagine, and that there is that other kind of information out there. And so, once again, if you make a study of your dreams, and this too requires a journal, you need to every night put down the next day's date in your journal. And then, let's say you're looking for an answer about something. You're looking for intuitive guidance. Write down what you're looking for guidance for in your journal. And then, when you wake up in the middle of the night, if that happens, see if you can catch the tail of a dream. And if you can, just give it a quick snappy title and write that in your journal before you go back to sleep. Either that, or when you wake up in the morning, try not to move, because dreams fade quickly as soon as your body moves. They're actually state-dependent, dependent on your body being in a particular physiological state to recall. So try not to move. Try to recall, what was I dreaming? How did my body feel? What was the emotional sense? And then, if you can catch the dream, again, give it a snappy title. Something easy to remember, like, raccoon in the refrigerator, or whatever the main strange image might have been. And then make yourself a few notes. And then once again, you begin to learn what are the patterns in dreams that give you information. I mean, we all have an occasional big dream that, really, we know it's trying to tell us something. But we are missing probably 98% of the information in our dreams unless we're really willing to pay attention to them.
Mm-hmm. That's right. And there's so much about our psychology, and I know you're involved with the PNI and you, or I don't know how you say it, psychoneuroimmunology, right? It's PNI in English as well, right?
Yeah.
Okay. And so there's so much going on at our unconscious level, and maybe most of us live governed by our unconscious level, because we are conscious of so little in comparison to our conscious level. And so how can we help ourselves to bring to the light or bring to the consciousness whatever is so unconscious and it's governing our lives in a ways that are not exactly very healthy, like self-sabotaging or falling into the same traps of relationships or style of life that is unhealthy for ourselves.
Right, exactly. I mean, that's the main question, isn't it, Gloria?
Mm-hmm.
My husband, Gordon, always says to do that, you really need somebody else. It needs more than you. We have to work on this together because you can't see the spinach in your own teeth. So you can't see your own patterns very frequently.
That's right.
That's why it helps to have a good friend or a couple of good friends that you meet with as a group, where you're really willing to tell each other the truth. When something comes up, and let's say that it's a group of 4 women who's decided to get together on some regular basis, maybe even once a month, that they're friends, they're talking to each other in between, and one of them starts to date somebody, and the others take a look at her and say, "What are you thinking? He's another low-down, dirty dog. He's just the kind of guy that you divorced the last time. What are you thinking? This is a pattern." And you were saying to yourself, "Oh no, this person is different. This person is kind. I finally found the love of my life." Mm-hmm. You can't see the pattern because the love of your life is always, it feels familiar to you. This person feels like everybody else that you fell in love with for good reason. He was cut out of the same piece of cloth. But the girlfriends can see what you're not willing to see. Mm-hmm. And I think we all need that. Like in a marriage, for example, it's wonderful when you can reach an agreement in a marriage that you're there to really help each other become more conscious. Mm-hmm. And so my husband and I have a number of things we do that are based on that. First of all, when we get up in the morning, we almost always ask each other that question, "What were you dreaming?" And when one of us remembers a dream, then the invitation will go more deeply into it. How do you think it relates to your daily life? And then the other one, when the first person is finished explaining their dream, we'll go on to say, "Well, if that were my dream, this is what it would mean to me." And that's not a comment on the other person, but it's another point of view. And then that allows a certain richness to come through, and it allows both people to go beneath their usual level of consciousness and conditioning, to become aware of their inner landscape. And so I find that's very important. Another way to do that, for example, right now, this week, my husband and I are reading a book together first thing in the morning. And it's the book by Donna Markova called "I Will Not Die, An Unlived Life." And it's an amazing book. The chapters are short. One of us reads the chapter out loud. And then we both reflect on it. And during that period of reflection, we don't, the other person isn't interrupting. The person is reflecting. And then we discuss it. And it is amazing how your patterns tend to come up. You see them when other people write about them. You see them in conversation. I think it's so important to have allies on this journey, allies in awakening. There's the last thing I want to say about this is usually the allies that people choose in a life that is unawakened is they look for allies in agreeing with them that they're victimized, or that the world is a terrible place, or that other people are to blame for things. Allies like that will get you nowhere. They'll dig you into a hole. And I think we all need to move away from so-called friends who are intent on commiserating about victimhood. And we need to move to another set of friends who are willing to help us find our strengths and who we're willing to engage in this different kind of dialogue with.
And who help us be responsible for our own things. Like in the other kind of that you just mentioned, the victimize is completely the opposite of helping somebody become responsible of their own life. And
right.
Do you think this kind of example that you give, somehow it works because deep down we are all one? Do you know that feeling that somehow we are all one and so we're all connected, and that's why somebody else outside ourselves can see things better for us than we can do?
Well, I think so. I mean, at some level, we are all one. I think that's very clear. I'm not going to call on quantum mechanics because I'm a scientist. You know, I have a doctorate from Harvard Medical School, and everybody just calls on quantum mechanics and knows nothing about it. But what I will say is we are clearly connected with a bond that goes way beyond our physical bodies. That's really, really clear. And frequently, I found when you're really a good friend with somebody, that somebody will have a dream that's meant for you. And it's not that they even dream about you. You may not be in their dream. But they're telling you a dream, and all of a sudden, the light goes off. And in some way, the great dreamer, the source of being, the consciousness that's dreaming us all, has dreamed through them to give information to you. That kind of thing very frequently happens. And there is a tremendous connection. That's what synchronicity is about. How many times do you really need to hear something? Really need to hear it. And suddenly, it's like maybe you go to somebody's Facebook page and all of a sudden there it is. Some stranger has given you exactly what you need to hear. Or somebody calls out of the blue. We all know how that works. And it's quite an amazing thing. We live, when Gordon and I wrote the book, Your Soul's Compass, one of the sages that we interviewed was a Sufi sheikh and a translator of Rumi. And what he had to say was that we live in a spiritually meaningful universe. And the way that the universe speaks to us is in accord with what we're willing to hear. And the more we're willing to hear, and the more we're willing to follow the guidance of what we hear, the more it just rains synchronicities, because we're given to by Rab, which is in the Sufi tradition, one of the 99 names of God. Rab, same root as rabbi, it means the educator of the universe. And so that there's some aspect of consciousness that watches out for our spiritual growth and responds to it. In other words, the more we respond to what we're given, the more that educating function responds by giving guidance and meaningful synchronicity to all of us.
So it's a matter of opening up maybe to the spiritual dimensions of who we really are, and intuition is a way of connecting to the pulse of the universe, or just to the openness to those dimensions?
Yes, I think that's very important. And then there's a practical dimension too, Gloria. So, for example, it's all very nice to say, well, when spirituality really flowers in my heart, I will be filled with forgiveness or compassion. But until that time, we all need to be working on that and doing things like saying, okay, here it is, I'm a spiritually oriented person, and I still haven't forgiven my mother, or I still haven't forgiven, that person who did something bad to me, of whatever kind, and no matter how bad it was. If you're holding on to that and you feel angry every time you think of that person and you feel upset, you're not free inside. And People frequently don't understand forgiveness. They think it has to do with condoning somebody else's wrongs, and it doesn't. You can testify against someone in court so they should go to prison, but you're not connected in the same way. Your heart is peaceful because you have forgiven them. So forgiveness is something you do in order to set yourself free. And I think in every one of my 15 books, I've mentioned forgiveness, and probably in 10 of them, there's a whole chapter or a significant part of the chapter that deals with forgiveness. Yeah. Because we're always forgiving both other people and, of course, ourselves.
Yeah.
You know, when Swami Vivekananda was the first Hindu Swami ever to come to the United States, he came here for the First World Parliament of Religions in 1895. And the thing he said that really struck me, you know, as I saw a transcript of what he had spoken of, was he said our first spiritual duty is not to hate ourselves. And most of us have got a long way to go learning how to be compassionate, kind, caring, and forgiving of ourselves, and recognize that you can forgive yourself for what you've done or not done in the past and act more responsibly in the future. That forgiveness doesn't, you know, forgiveness doesn't make things all right. But what it does do is it's a very great teacher. And it's your actions then, once you have accepted those teachings and accepted responsibility, that then make a better person of you.
I would like to share with you an experience I had about forgiveness, which it was quite interesting because we are talking in generally in all the mysticism and on the spiritual realms that love is the most amazing experience, and love is the actual power that we're here for. And one day when I was working on forgiveness for many years and understanding at the cellular level what forgiveness was, I got to realize that forgiveness was a step higher than love, because, you know, love comes easy for us. We can love somebody, we can love something, we can love the nature or whatever, but forgiveness requires what I got to the point to understand that forgiveness was returning to love, but it was a higher kind of love, because it really opened up completely to an understanding that was not just the simple act of loving, but a higher kind of love that completely put oneself in a state of awe and humility. And it was quite interesting when, you know, through the meditation I understood that forgiveness required to reach a higher level of love, because it was a way of going back to love, but to a different kind of love, to a very wide, unconditional, understanding, compassionate kind of love that most of us don't experience, because we're going through the personal love, not the impersonal, unconditional kind of love. So I don't know if that resonates with you.
Absolutely. I mean, that's so true. It's very easy to love somebody who hasn't hurt you, but to feel compassion for somebody who has hurt you very badly, to truly feel compassion for that person, to feel compassion for their pain and who they are, and go beyond what they have done. This is a very radical act of love, very radical act. And I always like to say to people, this does not mean that you ever have to invite that person for dinner.
Exactly.
That's not the point. You can keep very good boundaries. But when you think of them, can you have that sense of compassion in your heart to know, well, in order for them to have behaved in that terrible way, they must have been deeply hurt themselves. And to think about, loving the innocent part of them that's still there, but has been covered over with whatever terrible things they've gone through that put them in a mind to harm others.
Yeah, it's amazing. And in what way health is related to this spiritual awakening? I mean, could we, like, through the process of spiritual awakening, get sick or have, the Kundalini rising and make a lot of struggles in our body or things like that?
Well, that can definitely happen. And one of we've all heard the word healing crisis, and it happens with every kind of healing. So let me start with a simple example. I recently went to physical therapy because I've been having trouble with one of my hips. And I used to be a yoga teacher, and there are many poses I can't do now because of my hip. So I went to the physical therapist, and for about 3 months, I dreaded it because it hurt so badly. And I'd come home and do the exercises, and I was in such intense pain that I kept thinking, I better give up this physical therapy. It's just terrible. But I persevered. And after about 3 months, the pain went away. I was clearing some of the tension out of there, stretching some things. And the healing crisis was over in 3 months. And now, I'm just making gradual progress on opening that hip again, but it's not so painful. It's the same thing with clearing emotional blockages. When something comes, whether it's, the rising of the Kundalini that kind of blows you open, all of those things that were in there but you weren't aware of suddenly come up. That's why I said meditation doesn't always bring peace. It brings stuff up. It can bring stuff up. And that's simply part of the healing crisis, the emotional healing crisis. And I think the tendency that most people have is, something emotionally painful has come up, I'll distract myself or wall it off so that I can go on with my business and I'm not miserable. And what it requires, what the spiritual life requires of us, is to face our pain like a warrior, not to wall it off, but to go back to it. So if the pain of a difficult childhood comes to you, the idea is not to turn your back on it and move on, but to go back and do the work of healing that inner child, of forgiving the parents, the step-parents, the orphanage, the whatever it was, the person who may have molested you as a child, whatever it might have been. This is a lot of work to do. And it frequently, if you really, got a lot of baggage from childhood, it may take a number of years of therapy to clear that. And the biggest spiritual mistake that people make is the spiritual bypass, thinking, I'll just pray, I'll meditate, I'll do yoga, I'll read all these good books, and I'll get where I'm going. Well, no, you won't, because you have to go back through the pain and deal with it, and only then are you going to have the kind of interior freedom that really allows the awe, the wonder, the compassion, the love, the connectedness of true spirituality.
So we actually need to heal whatever wounds we have before we can actually keep on opening up spiritually or getting to know the spirit side of ourselves.
That's it. Mm-hmm. That really is important. And what frequently what people think, this is a terrible thing, this thing happened to me and it brought up all this emotional baggage from the past. Well, it actually is a form of grace that at a certain point when we're ready to deal with these things, they come up. And you can take that as a sign, this is good. I'm spiritually and emotionally mature enough now to know it's time to deal with this. And that allows you to approach it as a warrior and, again, not as a victim.
Mm-hmm. Now, taking from some of the things I've heard from you during this talk, like, it's a thought, we're thinking about it, and it's just a thought, and we are not the thought. I imagine the same with the emotion. The emotion comes through, and, it's not who we are. The emotion is not who I truly are. The thought is not who I truly are. I truly am. So my body actually is not also who I truly am, right?
That's right.
So what percentage of matter is actually spirit?
All of it.
But if we are not the matter, if we are not... I've had out-of-body experiences, so when I see myself laying on the bed and I go, oh my God, who am I? When I say I am, it's not the one looking at the body. I'm this state of consciousness without any boundaries or any body. So what is the purpose then of having the body, of having the mind, of having the emotion, if our true selves is about the spirit, but we have all these things that are, I see them as tools, but we identify so much with them that it's a blockage to experience our true nature.
Well, these are very interesting questions. Like why do we have bodies? Why is that happening? And one of the things I think for myself is only in a body can you experience these emotions. The emotions are an embodied thing. Only in a body can you experience the joy of touch, the pleasure of touching something that feels wonderful, of touching your beloved, of holding a child, of nursing a child, of eating something delicious, of feeling the wind in your hair, of smelling a rose. There are huge gifts of embodiment. Mm-hmm. And I think that there are probably many realms of consciousness in which our consciousness itself manifests. Like you, I've had many different experiences, out-of-body experiences in different realms, Gloria. Mm-hmm. And this particular realm that we're in, living in a body on planet Earth, has its own place. I think here we learn a tremendous amount about how it is that we manage our mind and create reality. So, for example, in other realms, what you think will manifest instantaneously. Mm-hmm. And what I say to people is you really wouldn't want that power here now, because almost none of us are evolved enough. I mean, how many times do you wish for something that really would not be good?
Mm-hmm. Most of us, most of the time wish. I mean, you can see just by watching the news how sensationalist we are. We are always looking for the dark side or the bad side of things to make it interesting.
Right. You've got to learn here a different way of thinking.
Yeah.
You have to learn here how you manage your own mind, how to be responsible, and how to be compassionate. So I think this is a tremendous training ground.
It is.
A tremendous training ground for consciousness.
So what would you say about the situation of the planet in regards to being a reflection of the choices we've made as humanity?
Well, clearly here what we learn on this planet is about cause and effect. Mm-hmm. That's for sure. And what we're beginning to learn is, my goodness, we've caused a lot of effects from running out of oil to the way that we misunderstand each other, creating religious wars, to how we've polluted our bodies, polluted the earth, and all of that. And what you see is there are people very willing to take responsibility for that, who'd like to see things change, and people who are not willing to take responsibility, that would prefer to keep things the way they are. And what is happening now is we've got a polarization between those kinds of people hanging on to the old and unconscious ways of doing things, and people who've become more conscious. And it will, nobody knows how this is all going to play out in terms of global change. Mm-hmm. But we know we're in a great period of shift. And my own personal opinion here, Gloria, is that shift is not an all or nothing thing. There are things that will shift greatly. There are things that will shift less. And the most important thing right now for all of us is to recognize the change is not going to happen. It's already happening. Mm-hmm. And the most important thing is we have to keep our center, use whatever change we're going through as a way to grow, and do what we can in an active way to help people who need our help in this particular time.
Mm-hmm. So do you think that maybe because of all these conscious and unconscious influences that are making us go through these changes that are happening, as you said, now, is that one of the reasons why there's a lot of burned out in people?
I think people are burning out for a number of causes. One of them is there's simply too much information. Who was it? The guy who wrote a book, D. Hawk, who wrote a book about the New Age, mm-hmm. And he was writing and saying the form of information, which is just like the 24-hour news cycle or the emails, all of that is the lowest form of information. And we are just overloaded with it. We can't deal with it. There are too many things to keep track of. There's just too much. Our senses are overcome by too much. Whereas the kind of information that comes from the stillness, from the silence, from meditation, from taking time, even if it's a half an hour a day. I know many people are still going to have to work 8 or 10 hours a day, no matter what. But unless you take some time to center yourself in your heart, in your authentic self, you will be overwhelmed by that other kind of information. And you'll burn out because it overwhelms you, it overwhelms the sense of purpose, it overwhelms your soul, and you wake up one day and you're depressed. Mm-hmm. So I think this is part and parcel of what's happened in this world today.
So is this what you're dealing in your latest book, Fried, which has to do with the burned out? Is this some of the topics you're talking about in the book?
Yes, I'm talking about burnout. And I wrote Fried because I saw people so burned out. Uh-huh. And that I myself have burned out a couple of times. Mm-hmm. And it's a state of great spiritual emptiness. All the things that were important to you to do for the world, that you thought you could make a difference, all of a sudden you just don't care about them anymore. You lose all your motivation. You find yourself out of compassion. You start being snappy with other people.
Mm-hmm. And so, what would be your suggestions? I know, is the book out already?
The book is out. The book's been out since and it's selling very well.
Oh, that's good. I'm glad. And so, do you have? Are you going to have it translate to other languages?
I'm sure. Most of my books have been translated into 12 or 15 languages, so I think that's probably going on right now.
Oh, that's great. So can you tell us a little bit more about, in these cases where there's so much information and people are burning out, what are your suggestions to how to handle this?
Yes, and I'd have to wrap up quickly because I have a 1 o'clock appointment, and I hear that the person has just tried to call me.
Okay.
So in terms of what you can do if you find yourself burned out, there are two things. First of all, you have to understand what burnout is. It doesn't happen all at once. It comes in stages. And it starts with just working too hard and not giving yourself a break. then you find you're not taking care of yourself because you think, well, there's more important people on the list and things to do than me. So you start to ignore yourself. Maybe your exercise habits get less than they should be, or things like that. You may find that you're starting to feel miserable and you don't even know why, and maybe you're drinking all of a sudden and doing things that are not, or drinking, more than you should. And then little by little you find you're losing your sense of compassion. You're getting angry with people, that you're irritable, that you're starting to get sick because you're stressed, and that's the mind-body connection, and finally you end up being depressed. And antidepressants are not going to help you because that's not the problem. Mm-hmm. What you really need to do is, as soon as you begin to see these things, you have to head them off at the pass. So, for example, no matter how busy I am, I always take off at least one full day a week where I don't do anything that seems like work to me. It's like I might go out gardening that day, but that's not work. That regenerates me. Mm-hmm. And the rest of the time, what you really need to be doing is saying, what are the things that give me energy, and what are the things that deplete my energy? And get really serious about that, because burnout is that state of being so depleted that your inner flame really is going out and you're spiritually separated from yourself. So, for example, what I find is that doing email is depleting for me. And so it's much better for me to do creative things in the morning and then only go to my email in the afternoon and then only once, not let it rule my day. Or I found there are definitely kinds of jobs, places where I'm asked to speak, that take up a lot of my time and are not quite on target for me, and they deplete me rather than giving me energy. And then there are the corresponding things that I would do. Well, being outside is tremendously rejuvenating. I need time outside. And I listen now to my body, and I give it what it needs, because the truth is this, Gloria, if you don't take care of your own energy and do your work from a place where you feel inspired and juicy, the quality of your work is going to be lousy. And that's what's happening to people when they're burned out. Their work performance goes way down, and you find you're working harder and harder and getting less and less of anything good done. So,
excuse me.
You need to look at
all those things. I got a little choke with my own saliva.
That happens.
Yeah. Well, I want to, first of all, thank you so much for accepting this interview. It's amazing that I got the luck of you accepting. This is an honor. Then, congratulate you for the amazing work you've done, and the way you've given so much of all your time to the world with the books, with your research and everything. And I just hope that all the things turn out great for you. And once I'll keep in contact with you and write you some email so you can take a look at it in the afternoon.
All right.
And so thanks so much for giving yourself the time to this dialogue, and I hope you've enjoyed it as much as I have, and as well as the audience.
It was wonderful.
Thank you so much, Joan, and we'll be in contact then someday.
Okay.
Wonderful, and then take care. Bye-bye.
Bye now.
Bye.